As we are reminded in the Charlie Gard case, the threats to equality of human life have accelerated in recent years in our courts and in our hospitals. This week, we introduce you to a man who's been documenting and clearly speaking out on these threats for years. Wesley J. Smith is a lawyer, a Catholic bioethics expert, and this week's Pro-Life Focus. Wesley J. Smith, thanks for taking the time to sit down with us today.
Well, thanks for having me.
You write and talk a lot about the culture of death in our world today. What do you mean by that?
That's a pretty big topic, but what in a real nutshell I think it means, and I believe it was coined by Pope John Paul II, but it means that as a society we are beginning to look at the intentional ending of human life as a means of solving problems. It could be assisted suicide, a means of solving the problem of human suffering. So we're getting to a place where eliminating suffering is becoming the purpose of society, and then that morphs very quickly into eliminating the sufferer. It may be a woman who has a pregnancy that is not wanted, and the solution is to terminate that pregnancy. And of course, it just moves into other areas as well. And the problem with it isn't only that people are losing their lives as a consequence, but we are losing the concept of human exceptionalism, the idea that being human being matters morally simply and merely because we are human. And that reduces the view of Western civilization, that we each have equal moral worth, that a human being's life is incalculable. And it is, I think, an attack on Western civilization, not intended to be, but it undermines Thomas Jefferson writing, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, among which are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness."
You've also written what you call the slippery slope from assisted suicide, which you've mentioned, to legalized murder. For critics who say that's being dramatic, what's your response?
Well, it's facts on the ground. First off, when I went to law school, somebody could not consent to their murder. And euthanasia is allowing people to ask to be murdered because they are being lethally injected for reasons of the patient's desire to eliminate their own suffering, or because they're in despair, or what it might be. In some countries, like the Netherlands, you're having mentally ill people euthanized. Belgium not only euthanizes mentally ill people, but then conjoins it with organ harvesting if the patient approved it beforehand. I can't think of anything more dangerous to a society and to individuals who are despairing and suffering through the night than to say your deaths have greater value than your lives. One thing more dangerous if a society comes to believe it. In Belgium, you have even healthy elderly couples have received joint euthanasia in order to, because they wanted to avoid the future suffering of the grief of loss of a spouse.
Of loneliness.
That's right, the future fear of it. And in one case, the death doctor, as I call them, was procured by the couple's son, who said, well, this was the only choice we had because I would not have been able to care for them. So when you decide you're going to start killing the elderly, killing the disabled, killing the mentally ill, killing people with cancer, you're creating a disposable caste, a killable caste of people. And here in the United States, where we do not allow lethal injection euthanasia, but 5 states, or 6 states, when you include Washington, D.C., which is not technically a state, allow assisted suicide, where doctors are allowed to prescribe poison for patients to take if they have a terminal illness. You're saying, well, okay, if you want to kill yourself, and let's say you're doing it because your business had collapsed or your children had died, we're going to give you suicide prevention. Oh, I have cancer. Well, in that case, here are your pills. You're telling the cancer patient, you're telling the person who may be worried about being a burden, and this is why people are committing assisted suicide, not pain, existential fear. They're worried about being a burden. They're worried about not being able to engage in enjoyable activities, or they're worried about losing dignity. When you say, as a doctor or as a family member saying, yes, of course, Mom, that's your choice. When you say that, you are confirming those people's worst fears about themselves, that they are not as worthy of being loved, that their life isn't worth living, that they are a burden, and it is a form of abandonment, and it is to treat people unequally based on illness.
Finally, do you have any advice for our viewers on how they can best engage in the culture?
Participate in caring for people when they're an extremist. I've been a hospice volunteer. I can't tell you how important that was in my life, just to be with people and families who are going through this. We are a death-fearing culture. And for Catholics who watch EWTN, that it seems to me is not the way to go.
Right.
You should embrace the person suffering. You should embrace families in need. Catholics should never allow, dioceses should never allow anybody in their area to die alone. Reach out to people. Let them know they're important. Let them know they'll get the kind of care that they need. Make sure they're not isolated. And a lot of people will say, you know, I don't want those poison pills. Life is worth living to the very end.
Wesley J. Smith, thank you.
Well, thank you for having me.